The Honourable Member for Onchan, Mr Callister.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise in support of the budget here today. I would like to start by congratulating my colleague from Douglas North, Mr Ashford, for delivering his first budget as the Treasury Minister. This particular budget is set around the island's future, and as we slowly emerge from the grip of COVID-19, it is absolutely right that our focus has to be on the economic and social recovery, not just of our island, but also of our community that has suffered greatly over the last 2 years. During that period, we've all witnessed the impact following the necessary application of safeguarding measures on businesses. The support packages introduced over the last couple of years has certainly helped protect many struggling businesses affected by COVID-19, along with protecting thousands of Manx jobs in vital economic sectors. However, as the Treasury Minister has already highlighted in the Pink Book, this island is also facing new challenges and new risks, especially around higher interest rates and inflationary pressures that will hit household budgets hard over the next 12 months, and at a time when businesses and families across Ireland desperately need a period of recovery from the impact of COVID-19. Unfortunately, this is all happening at a time when Europe and the UK are engulfed in an energy crisis around the wholesale price of natural gas, which has increased to unprecedented levels over the past year. It has also created an extremely difficult operating environment for every single business in the industry, and that includes Manx Utilities, which currently purchases around 40 million therms of natural gas for electricity supply on our island each year. Mr President, before I come back to some of the risks and challenges facing Manx Utilities as a direct result of the energy crisis, I would like to highlight just a few of the things in this year's budget. Firstly, I'd like to put on record my support for the £314,000 being allocated to fund the running costs of the Sexual Assault Referral Centre. As a member of this community, I truly wish we didn't have to allocate these funds. But having listened to some of the very passionate speeches from my colleague, Ms August Hanshin MLC, over the last couple of years, this facility and these funds should have been put in place many years ago. It is still very much a hidden problem on our island, and I sincerely hope that these funds ensure that individuals have the confidence to come forward and to receive confidential and medical and emotional support in the future. I also take this opportunity to thank the Treasury Minister for continuing to lift personal tax levels despite the financial pressure on central government funds at the moment, along with some of the additional increases in income support, child benefit, job seekers, which will certainly help lift some of the most vulnerable in our society. Can I also thank the Treasury Minister for the 15% increase in the carers allowance. However, I do disagree with the Treasury Minister when he proposes to set only a 3.1% increase in the Manx tax pension this year. Considering all the financial pressures facing household budgets at the moment, I do feel that the 5% CPI figure used in September 2021 is the correct indicator to be used in this budget. I also welcome the clear policy around the blanket uplift of around 2% for department income targets to reflect the impact of inflation and or the growth, which gives a very clear and transparent statement to the Manx people. However, I do hope the DOI Minister will confirm here today that some of the extremely high increases being proposed by his department in Appendix 9 will not be implemented by more than 2% without a clear statement of understanding to this court. Mr. President, it's also good to see a firm commitment of £25 million in this budget for the island's climate change, which is in line with the recommendations of the impact report by James Curran in October 2019. Hopefully, we will be able to deliver a net zero island by no later than 2050. In respect of housing and the £2 million allocated in this budget to the Housing and Communities Board For me personally, this is one of the highest priorities of this administration, especially around suitable and affordable housing for all, along with addressing some of the serious concerns around homelessness on our island. Having worked very closely with Housing Matters and other charities over the past couple of years, I wish my colleague from Douglas Central, Mr Thomas, as the chair of the Housing and Community Board, all the very best, because we need these housing policies and strategies to be implemented as soon as possible. As the political member responsible for tourism and motorsport within DFE, it has been an enormous privilege to be involved in this particular sector of the Manx economy over the last 5 years. Prior to 2020, we were welcoming over 300,000 visitors to our island, and I do appreciate the funds allocated in this budget to help rebuild the island's tourism sector over the next 12 months. The Visit Agency will be presenting its 2032 Visitor Economy Strategy to this court shortly, and the DFE Motorsport have worked tirelessly over the past 2 years to ensure that our flagship tourism event, TT 2022 and TT 23, delivers an enhanced TT experience, including live TV coverage, extended programmes, new classes, and a TT fan park. Mr President, as the chairman of Manx Utilities, I would like to take a moment to provide this court with some additional information in respect of the budget Manx Utilities submitted to Treasury as part of the budget process. I remind this honourable court of the rapid rise in the wholesale price of natural gas and electricity costs over the last few months, which has placed a significant financial pressure on the organisation. The unprecedented rise in global wholesale energy cost has led to significant projected supply cost increases over the next financial year. Manx Utilities Board and the executive team have taken numerous steps over the past 12 months to shield and protect electricity customers, especially over this winter period. Our hedging or forward purchasing strategy has been effective. We were very fortunate to have agreed prices for 70% of gas supply in 2021-22, but the remaining 30% has exposed Manx Utility to unprecedented gas price increases. The business has, however, managed to shield consumers of electricity from an additional cost of around £16 million. In order to protect customers in 2021, Manx Utilities has used its liquid assets to avoid passing on cost increases to our customers to the value of around £180 per household or business over the last 12 months. Manx Utilities has also secured purchase of gas of around 50% of the supply required for energy generation in 22-23, before energy costs started to increase in March 2020. However, the remaining natural gas supply was and will be subject to market rates, and therefore it will come at a significant financial cost until the wholesale price of natural gas returns to its long-term average price. With the volatility of energy costs at the moment, this does mean that our cost projections for 22-23 and the level of revenue needed to meet these costs have changed multiple times since we submitted our draft budget, and these will continue to change. We remain committed to following our price strategy and expect our tariffs for the coming year to remain within Ofgem's default tariff cap amounts. Manx Utilities will continue to work with the government to minimise the impact of the cost increases to customers, but it would be wrong of me as the chair if I do not forewarn customers to expect electricity tariffs to increase above the September 2021 inflation figure of 5% this year and potentially beyond. Manx Utilities continues to focus on its delivery of its long-term financial plan. It has been reducing its operational losses, improving efficiency, and has begun to deliver its operating profitability targets. The rapid increase in fuel cost has and will continue to be adversely impact the operating costs. Aside from the current high cost of natural gas and imported electricity, the key challenges for Manx Utilities remains focused on dealing with the energy crisis, the installation of smart meters, sewage treatment solutions, and the management of water resources, in addition to maintaining key infrastructure and asset and managing strategic risk. Manx Utilities have been working with government to support its commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2050 and continue to assist in the setting of the near-term emissions reductions. There's no escaping the fact that net zero transmission will require fundamental change to the business, and Manx Utilities is ready for and excited by the challenge. However, as with addressing other areas of emission from our island, the major changes required are not likely to be quick or easy. Manx Utilities is committed to ensuring electricity supply network remains secure, resilient and cost-effective, along with the reduction of greenhouse gases. The capital programme continues to have a significant focus on the delivery of sewage treatment solutions for the remaining catchments of Peel and Garth. Although clearly disappointed that it has not been possible to complete the end of discharge of untreated sewage to the sea during the last administration, we remain committed to a resolution and look forward to submitting planning applications as soon as it is practically possible. Manx Utility has sought to engage with various stakeholder groups in both Garth and Peel and is committed to open and timely communication. The complexity of site selection process has been a huge undertaking, requiring significantly more input than previous applications. Disclosure of sites at this time continues to remain commercially sensitive, so not to detriment the public purse. However, diligent reviews and complex assessments are being undertaken to ensure that appropriate solutions can be found. While we have secured key sites for Patrick, Bulldrine and Laxey, the final applications for both of the remaining catchments will be based on an assessment as they're being undertaken at the moment and in the best interest of the island. And we will continue to work with the communities of Peel and Garth as the proposals are developed. A further impact on climate change is the potential disruption to water supplies, which we have experienced in recent years, and we will become further a threat in the future. Manx Utilities is committed to delivering its water resilience plan as required in the Government's Island Plan, including increasing investment in the water network to reduce water losses through leakage and bursts, and will continue to work with the community to help educate and to assist with making wise choices on how our island's water is used in the future. In conclusion, Mr President, I'm confident Manx Utilities will continue to provide secure, reliable and quality utility services, along with making key and necessary improvements to the infrastructure to both reduce its impact on the environment and the environment's impact on delivering life's essential services for our island. Thank you, Mr President.
And the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Dr Allison.
Mr President, I'd like to congratulate the Treasury Minister for his first budget speech and thank him and his team for bringing this comprehensive programme of investment in our island to this honourable court. Over the last 2 years, government has had to step into people's lives as never before. To save lives, we've had to be asked to stay at home, to not visit loved ones, to wear masks in public and to undergo regular testing. To save our economy, government has injected tens of millions of pounds into economic support schemes, direct grants, loans and benefit payments. None of this has been possible without the dedication of civil servants across departments working for a common cause, and the trust and resilience of our island community. As we emerge from the dark days of the pandemic, now is the time to reflect, take stock and plan for the future. This budget begins that reflection. Whilst we will never be able to calculate the human cost of the past 2 years, the budget reflects some of the ways we have maintained island life and how we can return to a balanced and sustainable economy. It sets out a realistic but ambitious programme for investment, not just in the capital programme, but in our people, through increased benefits, reduced taxation and a full review of our finances. Throughout the pandemic, the Department for Enterprise worked closely with Treasury through the Economic Recovery Group. Benefiting from direct contacts with our business sector, we acted quickly and decisively to confront the problems we faced head-on and plan to seize opportunities as they arose. I'm glad to see this cooperative working will continue under the stewardship of the Chief Minister through the establishment of the Economic Strategy Board. This will oversee the implementation of our economic strategy, which will ensure everyone on our island benefits from sustainable growth. It will oversee and coordinate major economic policy decisions and monitor information from a wide range of sources about how our economy is performing. It will preempt and mitigate risk to our island's prosperity, whilst identifying and seizing opportunities to create a more vibrant, resilient and sustainable society. This budget sets out further steps in our recovery from the pandemic. It recognises the problems of the past while looking forward to the promise of the future. The role of the 4 agencies and the registries, integral parts of the Department for Enterprise, are recognised and appreciated. I would like to thank all our staff for their commitment and dedication, and those from the private and third sector who give up their time to advise, help and support develop policies and programmes which enrich our island. Within this budget, there are increases in our marketing resource so that our tourism and our hospitality sector can continue to recover and fulfil our ambitious targets to regenerate the visitor economy. We remain committed to bringing road racing back to our island, and after almost 3 years, with the return of the TT and Manx Grand Prix. This budget supports motorsports coming home, with further investment in marketing, safety and the long-term future of events which are watched and appreciated around the world, and even more so in 2022 as we turn on live broadcast for a global audience for the first time in TT history. I would like to thank the Treasury Minister for his personal help and advice regarding the new replacement TT scoreboard, which will now be in place for racing in 2023. This will be financed from within the total resources we have been allocated, thanks to the cooperation across the whole department and also the assistance of event sponsors who have never doubted the future return of racing to the Isle of Man. Mr. President, this budget draws a line under our recent past and plots a clear path ahead for our island. It invests in our people, in our heritage, but more importantly, in our common future. I commend it to this honourable court. Thank you.
Call on the Honourable Lauder.
Good morning, Lecturer. I have 2 gifts for the Treasury Minister. Firstly, it's a vote, and the second one is a short speech, and I'm not sure which one he's going to value more. I was delighted that the new Treasury Minister was able to meet with me early in the new year to find a lot of common ground on the issues that I've been raising for quite some time in this honourable court, especially around budget time, especially the need for greater transparency and public involvement in the budget process. And with this in mind, I intend to support this year's budget while progress is made on this front. And I really welcome the Minister's comments and commitment on this front. It's fair to say that this is a steady-as-she-goes budget, and that not a huge amount of the new administration's mark has been stamped yet on the financial plan for the next few years. And I will await that evolution with interest. There are some points, though, that I need to be raised, which I hope can be dealt with during the coming year and into the budget for next year. In big-picture terms, we may need to ask whether we're really analysing our national economic picture the right way when it comes to government budgeting. Our macroeconomic situation is the envy of many nations, with low unemployment and high rates of participation in the workforce. However, we appear to still be facing a structural deficit in the government's books for the next 5 years. If we cannot balance the books in good times, we must be seriously concerned about our economic planning. We must make sure that we look again at how our economy and how our government finances interact to make sure that we do have a sustainable model in good times, so that when the shocks do hit us, we can again in future call on the reserves to mitigate the worst effects on the Manx public, just like we did during the COVID crisis. And there are indeed a few potential shocks ahead, and the most obvious of these, which was alluded to by the Minister, is inflation. So we must again match the known increases in government payroll and government supplies and services and increased welfare benefits, which will mean an even higher increase in tax revenues from income tax and VAT. So this will not be an easy balance to strike, but I do believe it's incumbent on the Treasury to consider a plan as soon as possible to ensure that we can intelligently monitor the situation, especially if inflation remains high for a prolonged period. I'm sure that the Treasury Minister will be as concerned as I am, and many others inside and outside of this court, about the rising costs of government and the ongoing structural deficit. Whilst the Public Accounts Committee stands by to help wherever possible, we have limited resources, and so ensuring value for money across government will be absolutely critical during the lifetime of this administration. And again, it was great to hear him acknowledge that and recognise it during his speech. First amongst these, as he's also said, was health and social care, who, to put it bluntly, at the moment still seem out of control in terms of cost. Words that perhaps he couldn't use, but I can. I remain concerned that the issues raised by the Public Accounts Committee in our first report on Nobles Hospital back in 2018 still seem largely unresolved despite having those problems reiterated by Sir Jonathan Michael in his review. There is still so much work to be done, and we will be looking to the Health and Social Care Minister and the Board of Manx Care to really follow through on the transformation that we all know is required in this area to make sure that it is sustainable, affordable and delivering appropriate health care for our people. We cannot, however, be held hostage to fortune and continue to absorb the spiralling costs that are currently being incurred. I don't want to go on at length into the detail, but I would like to pick up on just one point hidden away on page 134, which indicates that the new Castle Rushen High School will not be completed by the 31st of March 2027. I find this unacceptable, and I know that my fellow members of the South will also agree with this stance. The only fly in an otherwise soothing ointment, Minister, is the £8 million raid on the National Insurance Fund to prop up the revenue spending. And whilst this is billed as a one-off, I think it sets a dangerous precedent. So whilst I'm happy to support the budget today, I won't be supporting item 7 on the order paper number 2. But I hope the Minister won't let this spoil his day. What else can I say, Mr President, but I look forward to next year. Thank you.
Call on the Honourable Member for Ayr and Michael, Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Mr President. Firstly, may I congratulate the Treasury Minister for presenting his first budget to this Honourable Court. A budget that has both to negotiate the legacy of the challenges brought about by Brexit and COVID-19, deal with the current problems they create, and set a course through not only these issues, but increasingly the other storm clouds that have quickly gathered, the rising cost of living brought about by energy, food and wage increases. A heady mix resulted in levels of inflation not seen for a long time. I know the Treasury Minister will be buffing his crystal ball to a high shine to try and understand what are going to be the short, medium and long-term consequences of these factors. Now, of course, these are on the whole macroeconomic factors, mainly beyond our control, but with the potential to have lasting effects on our economy and standards of living. And if many of these things are beyond our control, then all the more reason to look closely at what we can be controlled or influenced. And that is why it is vital that the government sets out a clear plan for our economic future. In many ways, that will mean that next year's budget, formed through this administration, will give us a clearer understanding of what this government tends to achieve following the production of the KPMG economic report. I'm not suggesting, though, that we sit and twiddle our thumbs and wait for that report, a report that is getting a heavier and heavier weight put on its shoulders as the global economic outlook emerges month by month. What we do know is we have in many ways a sound economic base, with healthy reserves, low unemployment and for some a good quality of life with low levels of crime. We also have high costs of living, skill shortages, a health service under pressure and a housing affordability crisis, along with the underlying challenges such as mental health and an ageing population. Yes, we have seen decades of GDP growth, which is very positive, but well over 30% of our GDP comes from the insurance and e-gaming sectors. A good news story and very welcome, but it is masking real problems and challenges that exist in domestic and manufacturing sectors, where for many there have been year-on-year declines in earnings and margins, made worse by the pandemic. The challenge then for this Treasury Minister and this administration is, through the Ireland Plan, to quickly identify the challenges and put in place the initiatives and support to maintain and build on what is working, but also to understand and have answers for what is not. That means seeing government expenditure as an investment rather than a cost. Spending on education, skills, infrastructure and health is investment for the future of our island and our economy, the very thing we need to perform to pay for our public services. How do we maintain or increase further tax receipts? By increasing our working age population, through upskilling our workforce and making the island attractive to business. How does government help that? By investing in education and training, identifying new economic opportunities, removing barriers, putting in place sensible regulation and ensuring our planning system is fit for purpose. How do we keep and attract young people to our island? By investing in facilities for families and young people and providing affordable access to housing and providing pay levels that are appropriate to our higher cost of living. It is only by prudent management of our island's finances by previous administrations that the Treasury Minister has the scope to put the necessary investment in place. I therefore recognise the need to draw down from reserves in order to fund capital elements of expenditure and investment through to 26-27 before returning to a general revenue funding model. But every penny of that capital expenditure must count. We cannot afford wasteful spending and poorly managed projects with long overruns. This administration must set discipline into capital project procurement and implementation. I welcome the broad spread of investment in the capital programme, recognising the need that the island must be seen as an attractive place to live and work, with investment in housing, transport links, communication and infrastructure. And I hope recognising the need to get the basics right. I am grateful that Treasury Minister has allocated expenditure for the Derby Development Initiative, recognising the need to invest across all of the island if you want broader improvement and opportunity. Moving to pay, pensions and benefits, and whilst recognising the inflationary increases applied, there has to be real concern about future rates of inflation and the effects that will have. I know the Treasury Minister will really have to stare into his crystal ball on that one, and will need contingency plans if inflation digs in and persists. But we must reward those who we rely on as best we can. I welcome the increase in personal allowance of £250 for individuals and £500 for jointly assessed married couples or civil partners. The 15% increase to carers allowance is a true uplift and much needed, and I hope a recognition of the incredible work done in the community by carers, and with an ageing population, their contribution must be properly factored into future spending needs for health and social care. I note the immediate plan to fill the funding gap in health and care and look forward to seeing the proposed plans to address that in the future. I welcome the Minister's intention to have a major review of the benefits system, something he actually called for in his first response to the budget in 2017. Here we are, 5 years later. I look forward to his proposals. In fact, to quote the Honourable Member for Douglas North from 5 years ago, the benefits system is something that has evolved over a number of decades, but is something that has just grown with top-ups and add-ons developed. End quote. Perhaps a similar view could be put to our income tax system, but maybe this is being looked at by KPMG. Certainly, as we look to fill skills gaps, perhaps the Treasury could look at, for example, tax reductions on second jobs. Mr. President, I mentioned at the start of my response the need to manage what can be influenced rather than the external factors that you can't. Brexit, climate change and now COVID are making us re-evaluate many things. Access to skills, energy security, supply chains, logistics and food security are some of them. I do ask the Treasury Minister, through his plan to reform the whole budget process, to look at how the cost and value of resources are assessed, having the vision to look not just on a year-to-year basis, but at the medium and long-term benefits of a decision. It needs to be more than just an accounting exercise. Making assumptions, for example, that food supplies will always be plentiful and cheap, and that we can always import all we need, if we had to, would be, I believe, a mistake. I welcome the funding allocated to agriculture and hope that the government never underestimates the value of our local food producers and the extra value they also provide to the careful management of our environment. Current activities in the Ukraine could triple the cost of many staple foodstuffs and disrupt energy supplies even further, adding greater pressure to household and government budgets. I would urge that provision is made in the years ahead for increased food and energy security. Mr. President, this budget sets out a balanced approach, realistically aware of the uncertainties, but with a well-communicated revenue and capital programme, including the future funding of the public pensions deficit. The bigger test will be the implementation of the Ireland Plan and the future budget against the background of global economic uncertainty. But I welcome and support this budget today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Call on the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As members will be aware, I have long been of the view that our health and care services have been historically underfunded. The independent report into the health service produced by Sir Jonathan Michael acknowledged this fact, and the fact that healthcare costs tend to increase by a higher rate than general inflation. That this means a new funding arrangement would be needed to ensure our health and care system is financially sustainable and can afford to provide the top quality care to any of us that may need it. As a result, we have worked closely with the Treasury team to implement in this year's budget what I hope is the first stage of this new financial approach. to begin to get the health and care services back on track to financial sustainability. As the Treasury Minister has already outlined, this is the first budget to begin to properly recognise the significance of the funding challenges within health and care. This is in part one of the underlying reasons for the supplementary vote request coming to this Honourable Court next month, a process which I very much intend to become the exception, not the rule, as it has been in recent years. A growth bid, based on the funding approach set out by Sir Jonathan Michael, is built into this budget to try and address the escalating costs brought about by demographic and non-demographic changes that are facing the health and care services. Rising drugs costs, increasing complexity and an increase in the required levels of activity are just some examples of the pressures on finances, and this approach will try and help address these challenges. And this doesn't mean we're providing Manx Care with a blank cheque, because as well as ensuring the budget has been correctly baselined, we also have to ensure Manx Care are delivering efficiencies and, as the Treasury Minister mentioned, providing value for money. So as part of the mandate that provides this funding to Manx Care, we have also included a cost improvement programme, a target of £4.3 million for this upcoming financial year. Importantly, as Manx Care deliver on this savings target, they will be able to reinvest these savings straight back into the health and care system. This is not about cost, this is about value. And so whilst we will be constantly trying to find efficiencies and improvements, we will be seeking at all times to ensure the services being provided are the right services for the island. However, the cost pressures such as those I mentioned earlier will continue, regardless of how efficiently Manx Care is able to operate. And so in the longer term, this new funding model will have to continue to evolve. Health and care is by definition a demand-led service, and it's not always possible to predict when the highs and lows may come. So it is welcome that as part of this budget, the Treasury have acknowledged this and have taken steps to ensure a contingency fund is available to the Department to help Manx Care manage the peaks and troughs of healthcare funding. Although, Mr President, I freely acknowledge we will see far more peaks than troughs. As the Treasury Minister has already stated, we have to operate within an agreed funding envelope, which means we need an improved mechanism to address demand-driven impacts on services. Now, the Treasury Minister is already aware of my view that this approach will need to further evolve to allow funding to be flexed through a multi-year approach. I look forward to working with him and his team to see if we can make this a reality as part of his planned budget reforms. The transformation projects will help deliver on longer-term efficiencies and, importantly, improvements to service delivery. Transformation has had some remarkable successes, but we know there is still a long way to go. One key example of this is the work around changes to care pathways, which will evolve and change the way we treat people to improve their experience with the health and care system and make sure they get the right care at the right time in the right place. These changes will be driven through the mandate to Manx Care, which the Department intends to use as a vehicle to focus Manx Care on delivering the right services for the island in the right way. Transformative change isn't just something that happens as part of the transformation project. To one side of this project, the DHSC and Manx Care are working on a number of initiatives that this budget will help fund, and I think some of these are worth highlighting today. Firstly, the Department is committed to enabling access to all NICE TA-approved drugs, which will enhance quality of life and the patient experience for many patients currently waiting for these therapies and cohorts of patients in the future. Providing access for patients to all drugs with a positive NICE TA will directly demonstrate that the Department, through Manx Care, is striving to comply with best clinical practice. Ultimately, the aim is to ensure that people on the island are able to access the same treatments which patients can access in the UK. The implementation of this will take a number of years, but this budget sets us up to start that process. This year, the Treasury have agreed to increase the funding available for specialist palliative and end-of-life care. Funding will increase gradually over the next 3 years to a total budget of £1.5 million. An independent external review in 2021 identified there was a funding gap in the provision of this specialist care, and this funding addresses the requirement for additional investment to close this gap. These services are currently delivered by Hospice Isle of Man under a historic arrangement with the Department. Now it's a commissioned service under Manx Care, who are responsible for the commissioning of third-party service providers. Funding for this service has remained static for around the last 13 years, although in that time, the service through Hospice have increased specialist services in the community to support more people to be cared for at home where that is their wish, which is entirely in line with the Department's overall strategy of providing as much care in the community where possible. This additional funding will help secure the long-term sustainability of this specialist care service and ensure it helps meet our needs long into the future. As members are all aware, this budget also includes funding to expand the ME, CFS and long COVID service, which is needed to ensure that the service can meet the potential demand going forwards. As we move now into the next stage of dealing with COVID, it is critical that we ensure people who are experiencing symptoms in the longer term can access the treatment and support that they need. With the uncertainty surrounding the future development of COVID and the requirements that the island will have in place to effectively deal with any future COVID-19 demand, driven by a new variant of concern or otherwise, a prudent decision was taken this year to ensure that budget is in place to allow the current 111 service to continue for the next financial year. Into the longer term, the Manx Care mandate outlines that this service should develop and evolve to offer a single point of clinical triage, a single front door for the island's health and care service that should help improve the way people access health services, find information and get issues resolved. Honourable members will be under no illusions as to the impact COVID has had on our health and care services, not just the pressure on finances, but on staff, on the impact on waiting lists and the delivery of key services. Going forward, there will no doubt be continuing ongoing impacts on finance and services that we will have to adapt to. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of this Honourable Court, to every single person working in health and care for their dedication and perseverance over the last 2 years, their ongoing commitment to providing the highest standards of care, and to provide them with some reassurance that through this budget we are committed to supporting them as we and they continue to deal with the longer impacts of the pandemic. As well as these specific plans, and on top of the transformation programme, Manx Care are working on the critical issue of tackling waiting lists. Mr. President, you will no doubt have seen in the press plans already being outlined around specific service lines like ophthalmology and orthopaedics. Members can be assured that more of this will be seen in the coming months. Tackling waiting lists and bringing down referral and waiting times is a key target in the mandate, with a longer-term aim of getting down to a routine 18-week referral to treatment approach to match targets set for the NHS in the UK. Honourable members, the inevitable question becomes, how do we pay for all of this change? Members will know my views on health and care being as far as possible free at the point of use, so to see the Treasury take the first tentative steps towards acknowledging this model through a one-off use of the NI fund is very welcome. And I appreciate this is a one-off and that we need to review and reform not only our national insurance system, but also how we fund things like long-term nursing and residential care. But for me at least, it does demonstrate the sort of flexible and innovative thinking that we need. The increase in carers allowance in this budget is another example of a positive step towards a more inclusive care service, and I welcome the comments today from the Treasury Minister about further evolution of how we fund and support carers on the island. Honourable members, we cannot just tread down the same paths trying to tweak things around the edges and hoping everything works out. So I would like to thank the Treasury team for their open-minded approach to these complex problems, and I welcome the Minister's ambitions for what sound like potentially significant reforms to a wide range of support services and funding arrangements. Mr. President, the health and care system is on a journey of change, with the destination being a greatly improved and much more efficient service focused on outcomes, not on process. No doubt there will be some difficult decisions to be made as we move through this journey, and as the newly restructured Department and Manx Care move into their second year of operation, I know that we are ready to face up to these challenges. Working with the public, health and care professionals and members of this Honourable Court will all be key to ensuring we overcome these challenges we're all facing. Honourable members, I believe this budget takes us a big step forward on this journey of transforming our health and care services, and I hope that it gains your support.
Call on the Honourable Member for Middle, Mrs Poole-Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This year, the Department of Home Affairs has made successful bids in 2 key areas, and I would like to thank the Treasury Minister and the Treasury for their support and recognition of the importance of those areas. Namely, first, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, and second, border security. Both are joint initiatives with other departments, Manx Care and Treasury respectively, and demonstrate the Department of Home Affairs' focus on breaking down boundaries and working collaboratively to achieve shared goals in line with the Island Plan. The Sexual Assault Referral Centre will deliver a fit-for-purpose facility for victims of sexual violence on Island, drastically improving the service currently offered. And as the Honourable Member for Onchan, Mr Callister, underlined, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre is an important matter now to be progressed, and therefore the capital and revenue funding is very much to be welcomed. As regards border security, additional staff within the Constabulary and Customs and Excise will strengthen security at the island's entry ports and help to ensure that an active presence is in place to protect and prevent criminal activity and other wrongdoing. Mr President, during the current financial year, we have experienced some difficulty with recruitment. And while this has had a positive effect on the budget, this is not sustainable and will need to be addressed to ensure we have adequate capacity to maintain current service levels. Travel restrictions have also meant that training budgets are behind schedule, and this will have an impact in 2022-23 as we try to catch up. This has meant that the Department for Home Affairs is forecasting a small one-off surplus for the current year, which will be used to offset the department's underperformance against our income targets. Some limited investment has also been made into the department's plans for digital transformation, and it is hoped that savings generated from these projects will help to meet escalating costs elsewhere within our services. Mr President, 2022-23 could be a difficult year for the department, with rising pressures from inflation, reducing income streams and emerging threats to the continued safety of the Manx public. Ultimately, the emergency services delivered by the department are demand-led, and this has a corresponding effect on resource utilisation. Over the last year, a combination of zero-based budgeting within a number of our divisions and the implementation of a number of savings initiatives have helped to bring expenditure back into line with budget, and it is planned to continue this work with the remaining areas of the department to help mitigate the risks that I have touched on. Priorities for the coming year will include the delivery of external inspections for the Fire and Rescue Service and the Constabulary, which will help to underpin the future delivery plans of each service. As I have previously mentioned in this Honourable Court, there is also a considerable volume of legislative and policy work to undertake over the next 12 months, and the Department will continue to work collaboratively with other departments and agencies to deliver this, recognising that resource is likely to be stretched as we look to achieve our aims. Mr President, as I've said, the Department continues to be driven by demand, and I would like to today acknowledge the dedicated staff in the Police Service, the Prison and Probation Service, the Fire and Rescue Service, the Communications Division and our Civil Defence volunteers. Mr President, they work for our safety every day, often in difficult and challenging conditions, and I would like to thank them for their contribution to keeping our island a safe place. Thank you, Mr President.
Call on the Honourable Member for Council, Mrs Kelsey.
Mr President, honourable members, I'm grateful to be able to contribute to this budget debate today and for the opportunity for the early sight and advanced sight of the Treasury's output. I'll keep my focus to two key observations, both linked to the capital programme and also closely linked with one another. Firstly, I believe there have been a couple of helpful additions to the budget before us that may not have been included in previous years. I warmly welcome the fact that the need for project development funding at the concept and business case stages of any new investment has been acknowledged and provisioned for. The ongoing commitment of £2 million per funding year is recognition that we need professional support at this very critical early stages of any major project. Glamour projects may be stopped in their tracks, but the ideas behind them could still go on to more modest, timely and deliverable programmes for the good of our island. In addition to the change to the approval process for capital spending for this and future budgets is to be welcomed, allowing Tynwald members to see and approve the full expected costs of complete schemes within the capital programme, rather than approving a single year's spending for a project as previously has been the case. This too gives a better understanding of the costs of project delivery at approval, rather than any need for significant additional funding being sought during a project's construction or delivery lifetime. Secondly, whilst I'm heartened to see the statement at section 8.1 on page 33 that the maintenance and improvement of existing government-owned assets is financed through the capital programme to ensure that they remain fit for purpose and are preserved for future generations, I'm not clear that that is what can be seen in the capital programme funding lines. Only last week, in another place, a Tynwald committee was told by expert witnesses that ongoing maintenance funding for some of the island's critical infrastructure had been reduced from £12 million to £1.5 million over the last 2 administrations. Sadly, I cannot see where this is being addressed in the figures at Appendix 7, which are what we are being asked to approve today. I realise associated revenue costs may be covered in other areas, but it's not clear where, how much, and who has that budget. From my experience of significant projects, we do need to develop our thinking from the delivery of an asset or assets to the delivery of a full service, for which the newly acquired asset may be just one part of, even though it may be a key part of it. I note with some concern that I cannot see where the cost of maintaining the Liverpool ferry terminal is provisioned for in this budget. It may well be that a third party is fully funding the ongoing support that will be required, but if not, I would expect by next year's budget to see the funding line for the annual upkeep for what will be a significant off-island asset which will have significant reputational damage if we don't maintain it. Mr. President, notwithstanding any doubts about the specific details I may have, I do believe the budget presented by the Treasury Minister and his team has been well considered, fair and achievable. To that end, I will be supporting the motions. Thank you.
Call on the Honourable Member for Douglas East, Ms Farragher.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, this is the first budget I've been involved with since being elected. I have found the process very surprising for 2 main reasons. Firstly, the time given, and I do want to be totally honest here because I think it's important. We've been given a presentation 2 weeks before Budget Day, and then we have to somehow digest this complex, technical and hugely important 183-page document in between all of our other roles and without being given any neutral guidance. Mr. President, it's no good us pretending that this should have been an achievable target. This budget is presented in an incredibly obscure and impenetrable way. Nothing is explained clearly. Allow me to present just one example. I ask you to refer to page 59, on which net expenditure for the Department of Education, Sport and Culture is given. Note in the first column of the first table that in the 20 to 21 budget there was a breakdown of services provided within education. As you can see, just for examples, student grants and free school meals are 2 that feature here with a clear amount. However, from 2021 onwards, there are no amounts provided, and it appears that these services have been consolidated into impenetrably named areas such as policy, strategy and government. Which of these areas deals with free school meals, and how does spending on these compare with previous years? This information is simply not there. Why has this been done, and for what purpose? It seems to make information less accessible. Mr. President, this is just one example of why this document is so challenging to comprehend. Both as an individual document and within the framework of comparisons with previous budgets. It's no good us all colluding in the idea that it's an easy read within the time frame. Let's just be honest and acknowledge that. And the second reason that I've found the process surprising is that no input goes into the budget from MHKs outside of Treasury, who were all elected in September last year. This document outlines what will happen with public money. Why is it being drawn up without input from all elected representatives? And who in the background does have input without us being able to check what their aims are for our island? I'm aware that the Minister has outlined his vision for budget reform, and I will say that I believe this is a good vision, but this is the document we're being asked to vote on today. I have concerns too about the overall picture presented in this budget, which seems to be one of a continuation of the status quo. And let me be clear that that status quo is one of not enough funding for our essential public services. I was interested to hear the Minister refer to the OECD's guidance because, Mr President, I was elected on a platform of change, of getting our public services back up to par, of, for example, increasing spending in education to be in line at least with the OECD average of 4.1% of GDP. As you can imagine, data from many sources repeatedly shows us that investment in education brings better educational outcomes, which in turn brings better life outcomes. And it's so easy to say that you agree with funding our children's future. Nobody argues about the importance of education at election time. But this, Mr President, is a crucial test of what we mean when we say that, because we are not investing. As a percentage of our GDP from the Pink Book in 2021, we were investing 2.01% on education. And this budget sees a continuation of that. Just let me remind you that the OECD average is 4.1%. And I'm aware that departments can and do approach Treasury for additional funding, and perhaps that Treasury may look to this to justify or balance out the low funding allocated. But this process isn't satisfactory. Firstly, departments have to go cap in hand to be grilled by a panel in Treasury about their overspend, when it seems to me they are in reality trying to mitigate an initial underfund. The spending for each department should be clearly visible in the budget document, with any additional funding as a rare occasion when there has been extraordinary circumstances, not a standard occurrence, which seems a little bit like Treasury wanting to wield more power than is appropriate. Aren't we working towards one government? And secondly, what is the membership of the panel who allocate funding? Who questions the departments on their spending, and what are their political aims? Don't we think the public should know this? Is this process transparent, accountable, democratic? I know that my honourable colleague, Mrs Maltby, has been working really hard within the constraints of this existing process, as I'm sure have all the Treasury members, and I really do commend them for that. I'm also really pleased to hear that a review of the process is being considered, and I look forward to seeing more of all those things I've mentioned in it, because the process of allocation of public funds should be inclusive, transparent, accountable and democratic. One area to pick up on that I do feel concerned about is the unclear information provided around public transport. In the context of being in a climate emergency, which we acknowledged in May 2019, I was very much hoping and expecting to see clear investment in the future with a sharp rise in the amount of public money allocated for public transport, so that people who want to can increase their use of it. Mr President, how else are we going to meet our climate targets? Although, again, the information is not presented in a clear way, it seems that the budget for the Transport Services Division is to remain stable, as shown in Table 46. I also note that there's no prepared change to bus fares, which is disappointing. A reduction in bus fares, or indeed a trial of removing fares, such as Fare-Free Friday, for example, would have been an excellent initiative to headline this administration's first budget, showing our focus upon both the climate emergency and giving tangible support to low earners in one simple area. Members, aren't we wanting to see a bit of people-centred policy? Isn't it time for a bit of forward-thinking, innovative leadership? There are positives. I am pleased to see a decent uplift in carers allowance and the 5% increase to some other benefits. I'm glad to see the personal allowance and income tax be increased. But we also see that disability benefits are cut relative to inflation and maternity allowance remains frozen. And where is the reflection of the fact that Tynwald has approved the Poverty Committee's recommendation that income-related benefits should include a proportional link to the living wage? I also do consider that the uplift to pensions is low, and I would like to know more about whether there has been any review undertaken of how this impacts people in receipt of pension. Is it enough to meet rising living costs? The Consumer Price Index has been pushing 7% over the last month. So, in conclusion, despite some positives, I feel that this budget is very much a retention of the status quo, when in fact we have a housing crisis and a demographics imbalance and a food bank and growing unrest within the ranks of our essential workers and the climate emergency. The Treasury Minister mentioned the word prudent several times in his speech, as well as saying this is not the time to react with knee-jerk financial changes. And although I agree that knee-jerk changes are not desirable, I must say that if this isn't the time to be, Research-based and data-driven but bold. Mr President, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Call on the honourable member for Albury, Castletown and Maloo, Mr Glover.
Thank you, Mr President. And before I start, can I just congratulate Mrs Diane KELSEY, MLC, on her maiden speech in Tynwald, which is well received. Mr President, considering we are, and I hesitate to say I pray, coming out of a 2-year pandemic, I was expecting a pretty much standstill budget. This Tynwald has had very little influence on this budget, as the road ahead was very much mapped out by the previous administration. However, this isn't a standstill budget, which I do find pleasing. The proof of the pudding now will come with the Island Plan running alongside the budget, and we have to now start delivering results. On being presented with a copy of the budget, and as a Southern MHK representing Albury, Castletown and Maloo, what was the first thing I looked for? Go on, have a guess.
Castle Rushen High School.
Thank you. Where are we with the building of the new Castle Rushen High School? I am disappointed to see, despite claims at the September election hustings by one candidate, the plans were drawn up. They clearly aren't. We're at the starting gate. The budget clearly shows those plans and designs have yet to start, but I'm glad to say money is allocated for the process to get underway. However, this is a red line for me in future years. We have a lovely picture of the new playing fields at Castle Rushen on page 57, but no school being built to accompany these facilities, and no prospect of that starting for at least a few years ahead. Mark my words and those of my South of Ireland colleagues, we are impatient and want to see pens and drawings replaced by spades in the ground and a new school rising into view. This is imperative to the people of my constituency and will again be the first thing I look up in next year's budget. World-class education is a key component of the future of the Isle of Man. I would also like a new southern swimming pool to be part of the plans for the new Castle Rushen High School. Now, due to financial short-sightedness in some cases, but mainly due to the pandemic, all the regional pools are struggling financially. The southern pool is in a terrible structural condition and will need replacing very soon or close. Regional pools are not just important educationally, but also fit the aims of the Island Plan under the headings Building Great Communities, an island of health and well-being, and outstanding lifelong learning and development opportunities for all. If we are to decentralise healthcare and move it to the regions, pools will play an important part. Not only will they help with obesity rates, they will be an important part of someone's recovery, or indeed as an escape in a weightless environment to help someone cope with a condition without the constant need for medication. So my appeal is to members, take the issue of these regional pools seriously. Mr President, I am glad to see a considerable capital programme, but caveat this support with a couple of questions or observations. Don't let maintenance slip. I was encouraged to hear the Treasury Minister's positive words about maintenance programmes, but if we let maintenance slip, it's a failure to maintain what we have, and then that leads to large capital bids to replace what we should have maintained better in the first place. It's not a cost-effective long-term approach, and a cultural shift is required here, and I'm encouraged by what the Treasury Minister had to say in his speech. I also would like to ask, where is the long-promised Central Capital Projects Unit overseeing all large capital projects from beginning to end? Has that been dropped? I am pleased to hear that reform to make our benefits system easier to understand and for the people in the system to navigate it in a far easier manner is in the pipeline, as recommended by the Poverty Select Committee. And I support the review of the way the whole budget is drawn up and presented. That's being heralded. That's great news. To me, the current budgetary system is one factor behind what we've had in the past, department silo mentality. Indeed, these factors and the Ireland Plan do give extra muscle to the calls for government maybe to work as a single legal entity. For this budget and the Ireland Plan to work, it's going to rely heavily on departments working far more closely together. Without this happening leads to waste. And I'll give one current example between health or Manx care and infrastructure. Patient transfers needs are organised by health, but infrastructure provides the minibuses and organisation without having the medical expertise as to an individual's requirements. Surely this can be done in a more joined up and more economical way. Currently, infrastructure picks up the tab, but health services, without any consequences to their own budget, order the service. This can and should be more joined up, in my view. There are really good things in here. New funding for the climate change work of £25 million, £2 million to the new Housing and Community Board, and the increases to the minimum wage, starting to close the gap now with the living wage. The carers allowances up by 15%, which is from £122.05 per week to £140.35 per week. And I hope that is just a start, and I thank Mrs Maltby, Treasury political member, for those figures that I asked for. And that, just as an example, compares to £69.70 per week in the UK. So you can see we are considerably ahead, and I think the more that the Isle of Man is ahead in areas like that, the better we are in a more competitive environment. So I'm pleased with the carers, but I am worried a little bit about the pensions uplift of just the 3.1%. I share those concerns that are already expressed by other members. I support the establishment just under a year ago of the Manx Development Corporation to look at urban and brownfield regeneration across our island. Just a question, though, regarding page 41. It's been going for, as I say, just around a year. So why no details of any equity or loan funding for projects that are not included within the 2022-23 budget? Don't want to sound overly glowing about where we are, as there are many possible hazards and trips around the corner, as we've heard highlighted. What will be the economic consequences of a Russian invasion of Ukraine? Are we out of the COVID-19 pandemic and now in an endemic situation? We have built hopes up at previous times in the last 2 years to no avail. Have world oil prices hit their peak, or are they going to go even higher, and for how long? Is there still a sting in the tail of Brexit? Just want to ask as well, where is the much-awaited KPMG report on the Isle of Man economy? Because I think that's relevant to the budget and the Ireland Plan as we move forward. And inflation is a big concern, especially as wages are not rising anywhere near to the current rate of inflation. Competitive salaries in key areas such as education and health are crucial for recruiting and retention. Electricity prices are expected to be hiked up, adding more pressure to households. People on low incomes are being squeezed from all sides currently. People on middle incomes are often forgotten about. We have to be a responsible administration and be prepared to step in to help people who are in dire need and struggling in these very uncertain economic times. I firmly believe as we try and rebuild and recover, we have to aim to leave no one behind. Government needs a social conscience, and I'll be interested to hear the Treasury Minister respond on the social pressures facing our people and the economy. Mr President, to conclude, I broadly support this budget as it is cautiously better than I expected with the economic hit the island has taken in the past few years. I look forward to a more relevant budget process in the coming years as well. This budget is as good as it could be in these uncertain times for the island as a whole. But a warning to finish with, Ignore stimulus, job creation, investment and economic opportunity in the beautiful south of the island at your peril. Thank you, Mr. President.
Call on the honourable member for Russian.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to clarify, Russian isn't intended to evade Ukraine.
Kiev's for lunch in the canteen.
We probably struggle to invade the pitch down at Nomad's grounds, to be fair. No, I'd like to thank the Treasury Minister for his budget briefing and for sharing the budget with members in advance of today. I welcome the increase in personal tax allowance, which will benefit residents, but obviously has a greater proportion on the lower earning households. Indeed, it's been suggested it'll take about 300 individuals out of the tax bracket, but I wonder if this welcome raise in minimum wage will have a negative effect on that as well, and whether any assessment has been done. It'd be deeply tragic if we implement a minimum wage increase of 15% to benefit our lower earners and then tip them over into the income tax threshold as well. So does that count of individuals who benefit hold true when those increases are included? Pay demands across many sectors remain a concern, especially for health and social care and education. It's welcome that Treasury has included an uplift of 2% for pay-related cost, but with the rising level of inflation, it's clear that wage demands next year are going to sit outside of this parameter. There are serious concerns over the gradual erosion of living standards as energy price rises, interest rate rises, and inflation mean that workers will all experience a fall in their disposable income. Many local authority rates increase well above the 2% figure as well, only adding to the pressures that many people are facing. It's been predicted that the consumer price inflation is on track to be the highest in 30 years. I don't think I was worried about inflation 30 years ago, so I don't think many in our societies will know how that feels. But we know that inflation hits the poorest families hardest. Price rises for basic goods often exceed those for luxury goods. Food and fuel costs make up a large proportion of spending for households on low incomes. The departure from the triple lock pension will cause concern for pensioners, especially as they face rising heating costs, and they are more likely to be at home more often and have health issues that will be impacted by trying to cut back on heating. We saw the extra payments towards heating costs increase in January this year, but it's likely that the higher oil and gas prices will continue for some months, and nobody here wants to leave anyone feeling the cold. I urge the Minister to consider what additional well-targeted support he can make available to vulnerable households who will be facing the high cost increase. The welfare benefits increases are only part of the solution. A 5% increase in benefits doesn't go very far when your gas bill has gone up by 27% and oil has risen by 63% on last year. The increase in carers allowance is welcome, but still doesn't go far enough to support families caring for relatives, and I look forward to the Minister's promise of further support in that area. Last year's budget speech promised a review of national insurance, and this year we have the same promise, and I'm hoping the Minister will make progress with this. The demands from health and social care will continue to grow, and probably beyond the levels predicted by the Sir Jonathan Michael report. So serious consideration needs to be given how we fund the care that our community both needs and deserves. While this year's funding gap has been met, future funding gaps obviously have to be addressed. It's a constant source of bemusement and ridicule that the budget process in the Isle of Man and the financial responsibility that departments hold isn't more sensibly managed, and I welcome the commitment to review that budget process, particularly if it focuses on long-term sustainable financial planning. The absurdities of the spending splurge that happens within government as the financial year-end approaches shouldn't be dismissed lightly. The spend it or we will lose it mentality is not consistent with the development of sound long-term financial management and serves neither the departments nor our communities well. It's the equivalent of panic buying gifts on Christmas Eve just as the shop is closing. Nobody really gets what they want or need, but the money gets spent anyway. And it's not just health that would benefit from a longer-term perspective and plan. I welcome the changes made to managing the capital programme, and I sincerely hope that the Strategic Infrastructure Needs Analysis project delivers the benefits that have been predicted. I note, however, with alarm that the Brexit fund is to be collapsed. Brexit is indeed the gift that keeps on giving. We are only now seeing some of the serious impacts that are going to affect our abilities to export beyond the UK. The burden of paperwork and health certificates required for export of Manx produce beyond the UK and into Europe should not be underestimated, and it comes with considerable costs. Costs have increased for many island businesses, delays in supply chain, shortage of labour and the loss of markets is just as serious now as it was in 2021. Some of these issues were masked by the pandemic, but as we emerge from the era of lockdowns, it's clear that the risks to our businesses and communities from Brexit are still present, still serious and still need addressing. Transferring this fund back into general reserves will remove support from our food producers, just as many of the real and dangerous threats to trade are coming into focus. This is a budget that makes assumptions about our recovery from the COVID pandemic, but just like Brexit, COVID isn't finished with us yet either. The impact of long COVID will cast a shadow over education as we try and support children who cannot cope with the demands of a full day at school, perhaps for months or years to come. Long COVID will impact on working life and therefore on tax income, and it will appear as extra pressure on our benefit system. But larger still is the lasting mental health impact that's being felt across our society. Much of the focus so far has been about supporting businesses, and it was welcome and justified. But as borders move to being more open, managing the impact of COVID now needs to refocus on supporting the recovery of people. Mr President, I welcome many aspects of this budget, but share the views previously expressed in this court over many years that my contribution today is on an all or nothing, take it or leave it basis. And although I appreciate I'm new to this process, I remain committed to the application of economics and knowledge to decision making in the court, whatever the prevailing temperature is. There is much to be commended in this budget, and there are some parts I'm less than happy with and would have welcomed a more meaningful debate about the decisions made therein. I fully recognise the work done by the Minister and his team to bring this budget together, and I look forward to the promised review. Thank you.
Call on the Honourable Member for Council, Mrs Maska.
Thank you, Mr President, and I do thank the Treasury Minister for his presentation of this budget today. I agree with some of the comments that have been made in this Honourable Court that the clarity of process would be very helpful. I think this is my fourth budget witnessing, and part of the capital projects process I think has kind of disappeared in some of the clarity, insofar as you could see what was planned for the future and what was committed in each year as it came towards you. If we are now bundling it all into one bid at any time, for instance, the works to the harbours, King Edward Pier, it's outlined as £3 million. Now, I having served on the select committee or the standing committee that looked at the harbours strategy, it was clear at that time that to actually secure our harbours around the island for the future, an awful lot of strategic work was needed, and in terms of capital, it seemed that there was going to be an awful lot more than £3 million to make our harbour accessible to protect against scouring from the new vessel. And £3 million, that's all that's there. It doesn't say what the detail is that sits behind that. So again, I'd like some assurances that where these simplistic figures are put forward to us, that there is, I'm sure it is, but there's an awful lot of work sitting behind that can add assurance and clarity when we just have a single figure. I then also come on to the built environment. And if I can quote from Carl Elephant, who was a former president of the American Institute of Architecture, when he said, "The greenest building is the one that already exists." Now, in the budget and in the island plan, there's not an awful lot of reference to our built heritage or how we're going to support built heritage. And it's hand in hand with our climate change as well. Our existing building fabric that's out there, the Victorian, the Georgian, all existing fabric has embedded carbon. I've gone on about this before, but it's true. Now, at the moment, we have no way of supporting our island community, of securing our older built fabric. The only way I can see any assurance and confidence to help people who own these buildings might be through our climate change initiatives, grants to retrofit our existing buildings, and also going forward, bearing in mind we've got to get the biosphere status confirmed. And I think these all tie together, but the clarity as to how we're going to do that, I find I struggle to try and find a way through the pathways. I do thank the Treasury Minister for maintaining the budgets that are being given to Arts Council, Culture Van and the Manx Lottery Trust. these have all provided such important support and sustainability to our community during very difficult times. I also see Manx National Heritage is continuing to gain support, because I think it has a new energy, and I'm glad that, again, that the budget supports the work that Manx National Heritage is now identifying as we go forward. One matter, again, turning to the built environment, and I have spoken to officers about this, is the inequality between the VAT rate for new build and that which applies to maintaining or converting our existing fabric. Now, I'm sure some members will be aware, but zero rating of VAT can apply in specific circumstances for the conversion of commercial premises into accommodation for buildings which have been vacant or not lived in for 10 years. Now, again, officers have said to me, we cannot just lobby the Isle of Man on its own, but I am aware that there is a head of steam building up in other jurisdictions to try and get this in balance and create proper structure around the VAT rates that make it much more attractive than it is at the moment to develop existing buildings and repurpose and gain a change of use, specifically to convert from commercial to residential use, but leaving a property to moulder, i.e. constructive neglect. You have to prove it for 10 years. There's something not quite right with that. So that really does need addressing. And if we can't negotiate the VAT rate, maybe we can look at rebates to attract developers, and bodies such as the Manx Development Corporation are also thinking along these creative lines instead of having to be negative. Lastly, I think I'm last here, I've got my scribble page again, but I have concerns about how we deal with our waste strategy as we go forward. And I see there is an item for Wrights Pit North, and again, that's the only place at the moment, unless we export, where construction waste is going to go. Can we look at repurposing fabric that comes from, if it's got to be demolition? But I really hope that we can move forward on the waste strategy from the Department of Infrastructure as we go forward, because I really have grave concerns that this is going to struggle to get on its feet, and it's not going to go away. I know there is concern within the industry as to what they're going to do with construction waste, but I would again implore a proper budget and a proper strategy that is supported by Treasury. And in terms of clarity of process, yes, I reflect on my time having gone to Treasury as a member of a department and going in and presenting what I thought were really valid cases. And then when the response came back, matters that had been really quite high priority in a department pathway had just been discounted altogether. What comes to my mind is things like pupil premium that we bid for in the last administration. It just got no mention at all, and yet it could have made such a big difference. So I think some of the comments about members being able to engage and be part of building this budget, I'd like assurances that that will be considered meaningfully as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. President. I will be supporting this budget. Thank you.
Call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. President. Firstly, I'd like to declare an interest as I'm a director of a business which has received COVID-19 business support. I want to associate myself with the Honourable Member for Douglas East. I admire her passion, her attention to detail and bringing back the focus to the people. One would expect me to speak about COVID business umbilical cord being cut that is supporting businesses, to lobby for continued support. But I also agree that it is time for these businesses to start to plan without this support. But be warned, this unemployment utopia may not be as resilient as we hope. Many businesses have been in a strange holding pattern for these past 2 years, and bounce back will not happen as fast as we had hoped as businesses re-emerge from a COVID economy. Disposable income has been drastically cut, and this will affect many of our small businesses. But small businesses need to make efficiencies, and jobs may be the cost of this. I welcome the personal income tax allowance to increase by £250, especially as we saw no increase in the last year's budget. But what does this mean in real terms? At most, a full-time single person paying 10% tax will be £25 per year better off from this change. This is just 48 pence per week better off. This is not groundbreaking. Where are we really going to see major change to help our lowest earners is actually through the rise in minimum wage proposals, which will be debated perhaps today. Should this proposal go ahead today, a typical minimum wage earner working 39 hours per week will increase their earnings by 15%, from £16,731 to £19,266. But they will also increase their income tax liability from £248 to £476. While this increase will narrow the wage gap and put more money back in the pockets of the lowest earners, this will also see an almost doubling of the amount of income tax paid by those people. So the benefit they see is courtesy of their employers, whilst the government reaps the benefits from an increase in income tax revenue. Continuing with this budget, there is a 5% increase for those claiming income support, child benefit, EPA or job seekers allowance. While a 5% increase to these areas may at first glance sound generous, this does not tell the full story. Many of those who are claimants of such will be minimum wage earning employees, whose income is made up of a combination of many factors, such as wages earned from their employer and benefits from social security. Let's put this into context for my constituents. If the minimum wage is increased, an 18-year-old living at home with their parents working full-time on minimum wage will see themselves 15% better off. Whereas a single parent also working on a minimum wage with 2 young children living in rented accommodation, working say 24 hours per week, desperately trying to make ends meet, will only see an increase overall of the 5% proposal in this budget. I remind this court that the Tynwald Select Committee on Poverty's report in the Income and Benefits recommended that Tynwald is of the opinion that the benefit rates should set a proportion of the living wage. This gap is most definitely widening. Further to this, what is being proposed in this budget would see the gap on those on low incomes versus claiming a pension increase further. The increase to minimum wage is 15%, as I said, whereas the increase proposed for pensioners is only 3.1%. 3.1% is good news, but I question how this budget contributes to any significant rebalancing of the generational inequality and unfairness we see in our society. Does it go far enough to help support our pensioners who will be facing huge exponential increases in costs such as gas, rents, rates, electricity and food? The gap is widening for our pensioners, leading them towards poverty. They struggle and they continue to manage, but they do this quietly, as these are proud individuals who will make ends meet, but at what cost? We are leaving them behind, and this needs to be addressed. There is also historical evidence of generational inequality over the last 4 years, proof of which can be found in Treasury's answer to my written question dated the 28th of January. From 2018 to 2021, the minimum wage for an 18-year-old increased by 20.5%, and over the same period in Category A, basic pension increased by only 12.5%. I am concerned the message this government is sending with this budget is that the government is happy to legislate employers to raise wages of their lowest employees by 15%, but not setting the same goals for themselves to do the same. In fact, it is only proposing to improve the income of their lowest paid beneficiaries by 3.1%. And the reality for our lowest earners and pensioners is they aren't even going to see this increase because inflation is over 3.1%. I realise that the increase in the minimum wage will only be debated today, but as there is already Tynwald resolution to raise the minimum wage to the living wage within 5 years, I had hoped to see included in this budget, similar to the UK government, such as employment allowance, which allows each business to employ 4 full-time employees on the national living wage without having to pay any employer national contributions over the year. Not only would this soften the blow for the rising minimum wage, new regulation to the employers, but would also boost the opportunity for investment from small businesses that can employ more staff and afford higher wages. This was actually something I suggested in last year's budget. I welcome the Treasury Minister has said in his remarks that there are no personal tax increases. But members of this House and members of the public should read Appendix 9, which lists many increases in government fees and charges. Whilst I'm happy there is no rise to bus and rail fares, there will be an impact on household finances through increases such as a theory test has risen from £35 to £44, an increase of 25.7%, or a change of vehicle ownership has raised from £12 to £15, an increase of 25%. Equally, driving test fees for a car has gone up from £57 to £72, a whopping increase of 26.3%. Mr. President, you may also miss the 2% increase in school meals, which equates to 25% per week per child. This may not sound much, but if you're a single parent with 2 children, as I mentioned earlier, this will more or less counteract the entire benefit of the increase in personal tax allowance. Giving to the poor with one hand, then taking from the poor with the other. At least Robin Hood took from the rich to give to the poor. Also, there is more good news, Mr. President. Although parents will be paying more for their children's school meals, there is 0% increase proposed to any of the TT grandstand tickets or race day hospitality packages. So it's really great. A fastest lap hospitality experience, for instance, will cost the same as it did in 2019. This is a great example of a non-joined-up government, while one department is struggling and the other one isn't. Mr. President, I appreciate the work and effort that has gone into producing this document from the Department and the Minister contributions. I also appreciate the Treasury Minister has promised budget reform going forward. But this budget is still far away from modern democracy. During the debate for our Island Plan, I spoke about how hard this government would have to work to gain the trust of the people. And I have to live by those same standards. I cannot expect it from government if I'm not willing to do the same. For example, some of my pledges in my manifesto included to strive for a streamlined government, to reduce social inequalities, to support businesses through living wage transition. And importantly, locally, I gave my full support for the Spring Valley refurbishment and to the residents as such. Some of these residents are living in constant turmoil with the refurbishment uncertainty. Some residents are living in unacceptable conditions due to damp. We are missing an opportunity here to increase our social housing stock and build eco-homes, ones that are more energy efficient using renewable energy sources, driving down the cost of living for some of the most vulnerable in our society. Mr. President, as a Douglas South MHK, I cannot, with good conscience, support this budget when I can see that this refurbishment possibly won't start in this administration, according to Appendix 5. In summary, I am pleased there is a renewed focus on services in this budget, but there isn't enough to give hope for a better future for the hard-working people and the proud pensioners of this island. And if I were to support this budget, I would lose the trust of my constituents. Thank you, Mr. President.